I'm not going to go into a whole lot of details about this, but over the past, a little bit more than the past week or so, my job has actually entailed a lot of standby time. So basically a lot of, sit around and wait, go sit in a truck or go sit in a trailer and kind of wait for them to need you. And so one thing that I was doing at work over the past, I'd say about 10 days or so, is reading a lot of books. And, the funniest thing happened to me. Normally I keep what I call like a camp kit, and I never disassemble it. And there's always books in there, clothes, all kinds of stuff that a person would need to basically go work out of camp. And I actually ran out of books. I ran out of books at one point to read during this one particular stint at work. And so I had to kind of scramble around and try to round up some more books to read, which was not at all an easy proposition in Grande Prairie, especially when you're working, the kind of hours that I was working. Let's just say that not a lot of bookstores stay open that late. And so at one point I actually had to resort to going and trying to find some books. I remembered that some of the Dollar Tree stores out there actually sometimes have some very interesting things in there that you can find. And I did find something. Did I ever find something? I found something that, in all honesty, has so little business ever making it, to the $1.50 bin in a Dollar Tree. It is almost criminal. The book that I discovered there was called In Evil Times by Melinda Snodgrass. And so it's a sci-fi novel. It's actually the second book of a series called the Imperials Saga. Now, usually, if a book is the second or third, in something like that, usually that kind of dissuades me, but I decided to give this book a chance, and man, am I ever glad that I did. So I don't want to give away too many details. I don't want to spoil this book for anybody who hasn't read it. I've actually picked up a few more copies of it, and I'm actually going to do some giveaways at a certain point down the road here. But in the meantime, I'm going to kind of try and talk about it in a little bit of a broader fashion, because that is how enthusiastic I am about this book, and really about this author, that I'd like to kind of give them the kind of support that it seems must have been lacking for this book to ever have wound up in a dollar store dime bin. It does not belong there. And so basically what this book is, it's kind of a familiar little trope in science fiction in a lot of ways. And basically what it is, it's it's like a future society that, when you think about it, is really, it's a dystopia disguised as a utopia. And so as human history has evolved, in this particular universe, humanity has kind of developed this really rigid class structure, as you see in a lot of these in a lot of these novels like this. And so the book has two principal main characters. On one hand, you have a character by the name of Tracy, and he's kind of this this low-born young man, and he manages to get a scholarship to go into the the military academy, the officer training military academy of this society. I mean, literally kind of their equivalent of West Point is probably the best way to describe it. And then the other principal character is a character by the name of Mercedes, and she's actually she's the daughter of the emperor of this society, so she's literally like the next person in line, to rule the whole thing. And so as the book begins, and this is not a spoiler by any means, this is right at the beginning of the book, Tracy and Mercedes, they were in this school together. They called it the High Ground, and they have a relationship. They've had a relationship. They are, let's say, very romantically inclined towards one another. But that's not going to work out, regardless about how she feels about Tracy. Instead, Mercedes goes off and she marries this other guy because she feels like she's supposed to marry somebody with a title. Is basically what's expected of her. And so as the book begins, they're kind of going their separate ways. And Tracy, because he's a low-born man that's, kind of supposed to be moving into what you would call, the upper echelons of that particular society, he doesn't really fit in on either side. He's resented by the people that you would also consider to be, low-born. And he's also resented by the aristocracy because they view him as a threat. And really, there's probably some good reason why they would view him as a threat. Because not only is he very good at the things that he does as an officer in the in the space fleet of this society, but he's actually better than almost any of them. But because of them are aristocrats, and he's low-born, a lot of them, they just kind of assume that they can do whatever they want to him, and that there won't be any consequences for them. And unfortunately, at the beginning of the book at least, that does very much seem to be the case. And the whole thing actually kind of reminds me of something I was talking about previously on the podcast, and this kind of idea that came up again. So I was talking about Wreck-It Ralph in an earlier segment of an earlier episode of this podcast. And I was talking about the what I called the toxicity of status obsession. Where you saw all of these characters in this movie, and to them it didn't really matter. The only thing that mattered about that particular character wasn't really who he was, or what he did, or how important the function of him was within their lives. The only thing that really mattered to them, was what he was. And because of what he was, they really just, they assumed that they could treat him however they wanted. And then that did, in that particular film, wind up having a lot of consequences. And in this novel, Snodgrass actually presents to us a society that really is just brimming with what I would refer to as the toxicity of this status obsession. But there's something that's kind of said about a particular type of person these days that really reflects very strongly in a lot of these characters. And really one thing that is said, that a particular segment of people, let's just say influencers of a particular political bent, the one thing that they say about them is that the one thing that they find unforgivable more than anything else, they obviously they have a difficult time letting it go when anybody is wrong, but the one thing that a lot of them find absolutely unforgivable is when people that disagree with them turn out to be right. And they'll respond very pettily in those kinds of situations, and they'll come back and they'll try to punish these other people for being right in a place where they were wrong. And really their only idea, their only goal, their only merit in this situation is that they want to win, regardless of the merits of their position compared to, say, the other person. And that's exactly the way that, these aristocrat characters, they call themselves the Fortune 500. So that's not too hard to figure out exactly where all of that is stemming from. But that's exactly how they regard Tracy as he goes about the events of this book, and he consistently does the right thing. A lot of these characters who think that they don't have to do the right thing, and they just don't want to do the right thing. They would rather do the thing that they want to do rather than what's right. The one thing that they hold against him more than anything are these instances where he was right and they were wrong. There's something about the idea of an aristocracy, and by the way, I would have to suggest that aristocracies, they are not dead and they are not powerless, in our modern society, the society that we have right now. But the thing about an aristocracy is that an aristocracy frequently mistakes itself for a meritocracy. A lot of these people, they are born into this thing, and they are often taught that basically because they're aristocrats, that they were, they're aristocrats because they were born better. And they think themselves superior by birth and superior by metal. And quite frankly, we find that that is not the case. Classic example, Canada's Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. He was born into that whole thing. He was the son of Pierre Trudeau, son of a previous Prime Minister. And he walked into that whole thing with a lot of people just assuming that he was better. As a matter of fact, that was kind of the central thing of his, of his party's slogan. It was like, oh, choose better. And from what we've seen, once he got into office, he's definitely not any better. in an actual meritocracy, he would not get by. But he does manage to get by, in no small measure because of a fairly large number of people in Canada who actually kind of look to him as an aristocratic figure, rather than an actual democratic figure. And they don't have that same standard where they actually even expect him to go into office and succeed. They only expect him to go into office and just be, and kind of make them feel good about themselves. And of course, then when they're around talking about their politics, they're talking about, they try to talk about it as if it were a meritocracy. Well, the simple fact of the matter is that these are power structures that really are anti-meritocratic. Now, as much as I wish this were not the case, the more I look around, like in particular, in places like social media, I see that really, I actually do think that there is, there is something active in our society today, a social echelon that I would say that's actually, in many regards, not too dissimilar from the Fortune 500 of the Imperial Saga, and actually I would refer to them as the blue check marks. I know for a fact that I'm not the only person who has ever noticed this, but if, for example, if you're on twitter.com and you happen to have that verified blue check mark next to your name, which basically means that, it's basically Twitter's way of telling you that you're either famous or prominent, there's a lot of stuff that you can get away with that a lot of other people can't get away with. There are some cases where you could almost say, it would be an exaggeration to say that they get away with murder, but think about that particular turn of phrase. They get away with all kinds of things that absolutely nobody else would get away with. And there are people within our society that actually have a little bit of status and a little bit of power and a little bit of influence and privilege themselves, who give a lot of status and influence and privilege and sometimes even power to somebody just because they happen to have that status symbol next to their name on a social media platform. And they can go out and they could be, totally almost comically wrong on a particular topic, or do something that, quite frankly, most people would find to be absolutely atrocious, and still find all kinds of sycophants, willing to rally to their side with a yes queen, with a resounding rallying cry of yes queen, and it basically renders them unanswerable, either to people that are right in an instance where they might be wrong, or somebody that they might have actually wronged, particularly if they're somebody of a lower status than themselves. That is a theme that is woven just brilliantly and masterfully all through this novel, by Melinda Snodgrass. So, like I said before, I can't recommend this strongly enough. I remember it being said a few years ago that The Expanse, The Expanse was like Game of Thrones set in space. And The Expanse is very, very good, but it's definitely not Game of Thrones set in space. Actually, I would suggest that, in Evil Times, the Imperials Saga, that is probably one of the closest things to Game of Thrones, aside maybe from Dune. Dune's obviously right there in that same category. But if you want to talk about something that deserves that particular tagline, then Snodgrass's Imperials Saga definitely deserves it. Oh, and by the way, I don't think that's a coincidence, because I understand that George R.R. Martin has actually collaborated with her, in terms of kind of helping to craft that universe. I understand that he might have even helped her craft some of the characters. And so when he says that, when he speaks so highly of this series, and he speaks very highly of this series, that's not a surprise to me. I understand exactly what it is that George R.R. Martin, loves about this series, because it's everything that I love about it too.